I used a Ben Nye bruise wheel kit to do this look today. I read Frankenstein for the first time ever this summer. I was thoroughly gagged, gooped, and dare I say, aghast. I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was fine. I know a lot of people typically read this book as a part of their usually high school curriculum in America at least, but I wasn't part of a school, I guess, that chose to add that to the curriculum, at least not in my AP English classes, so we read other things. I wanted to make a video about Frankenstein because I have no one to talk to about it. None of my friends give a shit, and I just want to talk about my feelings because I enjoyed the book. I actually thought it was really funny, and why not make a video about it? Because what else am I going to make a video about? Movies? Not here. Hello, hi, welcome, or welcome back to Mia Likes Movies. My name is Mia and I like movies. I like a lot of other things too, like books, but Mia Likes Movies just sounded the best. Today we're talking about Frankenstein. Let's get into it. I'm going to explain the plot to you. I have my notes on here. The story takes place in 18th century Europe and follows several characters throughout the narrative. We're actually first introduced to our first narrator, Captain Robert Walton. He is on an expedition to the North Pole in order to gain some scientific knowledge. It's not relevant. All that we have to know is that it's a dangerous journey in the pursuit of knowledge. He's writing letters to his sister Margaret. The journey to the north is interrupted when they run into like too much ice. Likely thing to be up north is too much ice. There they end up finding this mysterious Dr. Frankenstein trapped in this ice block thing. He's very emaciated, he's ill, so they take him in and they take care of him. Frankenstein, and I'll refer to him as Dr. Frankenstein, Frankie, Victor, Vicky, they're all the same person, okay? He tells Walton and his crew that he's looking for a creature, and then they realize that they actually did see the creature before. They saw like this really big thing, man, on like a dog sled passing by a couple nights before, and they're like, oh yeah, I guess we saw him. Frankenstein starts to tell Walton his story while he's recovering from this illness. And then this is when Mr. Frankenstein sort of becomes our narrator. So it switches over to his perspective as he tells Walton his story. Basically, at first we get a lot of backstory about Victor. He's Swiss, he's rich, and he really likes to learn. When he was 5, his parents adopted this little Italian girl named Elizabeth, and well, their end game. They also kind of adopt this other girl, Justine. They don't really explain like how that adoption works. Basically, we just need to know that they have this lady, Justine, and Justine becomes sort of like a nanny slash tutor to Frankenstein's brother, William. Before Victor goes off to university, his mom sadly passes away, and in his grief, he gets really into his studies, especially chemistry and science and like the philosophy of science and life. SparkNotes says he, quote, gets consumed by the desire to discover the secret of life, and after several years of research, becomes convinced he has found it. Victor basically gets a bunch of body parts from various places, like the cemetery, morgues, and puts them together. He ends up making an 8-foot tall being that we'll call creature or monster or his creation. It doesn't have a name. He claims that he was pretty selective when choosing the body parts to create this creature, but ends up looking pretty ugly. One rainy night, the monster ends up coming to life. Frankenstein never tells us how. Contrary to popular belief, the whole scene where lightning comes down and he goes, "It's alive," that doesn't happen in the book, okay? Book fans know. We just know that it happens, and it happens to be raining when it happens. It's not the point for us to know how he comes to life. Frankenstein deliberately is avoiding that, but we'll get into that later. And then this is one of my favorite parts of the book. When the creature comes to life, and as we all do when we are overwhelmed by the sudden realization of our responsibility, Dr. Frankenstein fled to his bed to sleep the whole situation off. Quote, "Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep." This dude brought essentially what is a corpse to life. He gets so overwhelmed by all his feelings that all he can do is run away and go sleep in his bed. An icon, truly. Victor does eventually kind of like get the courage to go back to his lab to confront what he has done, but when he gets there, the creature is missing. Uh-oh, what could happen? So then Frankie gets really sick because of like everything happening. He gets nursed back to health by his good friend Henry Clerval, and then during this time he gets a letter from his dad saying that his brother William was murdered. So Victor ends up going back home to Geneva, Switzerland. For some reason I wrote Italy in here. He's not Italian. On his way back home, he ends up seeing a large figure in the forest, and he knows it's the creature, and he becomes sure that the monster is responsible for the death of William. While at home, Victor finds out that Justine, who if you remember is one of the girls that the family took in that ended up becoming William's nanny/tutor, she is actually accused of William's murder. So she actually ends up getting convicted because there's no other proof or testimony or anything. Frankenstein considers testifying, saying that the monster did it, but then he'd have to admit to creating the life that killed his brother, and he didn't want to do that, and also no one would believe him and they would think he was crazy, so he just said, I'm not going to do that. So Justine ends up getting hanged for that crime, and it's really sad, and Victor feels horrible about it because, well, it's his fault. He decides to go climbing in the Alps. Men will literally do anything but go to therapy. On his little hike, Frankenstein is actually approached by the monster, and Frankenstein tells him to go away, but the creature replies, quote, I expected this reception. He says more, but the first thing the monster says in the book is, I expected this reception. An icon. Like, this book is unironically so hilarious to me. So basically the monster is like, I know you want to leave, but I insist that you stay and let me tell you my story because you have to, because you created me and you made me a monster, so you have to. And Victor's like, fine, I'll listen. And then this is when the monster takes over as the narrator. So at this point we're the story within the story within the story, okay? We're 3 stories deep at this point. So after being abandoned by Dr. Frankenstein, his creator, the monster ended up fleeing and living alone in the wilderness. He tried to approach some people, but he learned very quickly that they all immediately feared him. So he decided to hide in the forest, and while he was hiding, he learned about fire and he learned to gather. So he was living, but not like a very good life, just like the basics. And he ended up finding an abandoned building that was sort of like connected to a cottage, and there was a family that lived in the cottage. He would secretly observe their interactions with one another. He grew very fond of them. He kind of saw them as like, not entertainment, but just like he saw them almost as like an extension of his family, almost like a pseudo family, even though they didn't know of him or care for him in any way, but he ended up starting to care for them and getting invested in their lives. They were struggling a little bit, so he wanted to help them, so he got them firewood and he would do things for them secretly. He knew though that if he would ever approach them that they would be terrified of him because that's what everyone else had done when they saw him before. A Turkish woman ends up arriving at the cottage, and it turns out to be the former lover of the son in the family, and the son begins to teach her English. The monster observes and listens to these lessons and ends up essentially learning English along with her, and then he is able to like speak and think in full sentences, and then he even teaches himself how to read after finding like a mysterious bag that has various poems and books in it. So one day the monster decides that he is actually going to approach the family, and he has this plan. So there's the dad, the son, the daughter, and then the son's Turkish girlfriend, and the dad is blind. And so the monster decides that if he sort of like goes up when son, the daughter, and the son's girlfriend are out of the house, he can befriend the blind father, earn his trust, and then the father can kind of vouch for him as like, oh no, he's not a monster. He does actually go through with it though, and he does like approach the father as a traveler, and he's essentially like, can I come in? I'm being treated poorly and I just need somewhere to stay. And the father's like, no problem. So the father and him end up talking, but then the son and the daughter and the girlfriend come home, and of course they're like, oh my god, get away from our dad, you terrifying beast. The son tries to attack the monster, so the monster of course flees. The next day, the family ends up moving out of the cottage because of this incident, which brings us another one of my favorite quotes from the novel. Do you consider that you will be obliged to pay 3 months' rent and to lose the produce of your garden? Even in 18th century, landlords wouldn't do anything but let you break your lease without issue. This guy is literally talking to his landlord in the middle of this whole situation. Like, it's funny to me. But this ends up putting the monster sort of on this dark path, because now he sees that even though he went to these people with the goodness and kindness of his heart, he helped them, he wanted to befriend them, they turned around and attacked him. So he starts to sort of denounce humanity, and he decides that it's his creator's fault, and he's going to set out to Geneva to confront his creator, basically. And on this journey, he ends up saving a little girl from drowning, but the girl's dad, I think, was like, unhand her, you monster, and shoots the monster. And so at that point, he's like, okay, fuck this, people suck, and you all deserve to die. While he's in Geneva, he ends up sort of accidentally stumbling upon William Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein's brother, you know, the one that was murdered. Yes, so the monster stumbles upon William, and he tries to talk to him, and as William turns away, the monster grabs the child, and the child's like, unhand me, my father will hear of this, my father something Frankenstein. And the monster's like, oh, you're related to Victor Frankenstein. He doesn't say this. Instead, he attacks and kills William. So it was the monster that murdered William. Victor was right. It was the creature. And we have confirmation here. And the creature took a locket off of William and planted it in Justine's dress to frame her for the murder. So that's how Justine sort of got blamed for it too. Kind of fucked, honestly. So then the creature asks Frankenstein to make him a sex doll. I mean, a wife to make him happy. That's what I wrote there. The creature claims that if Frankenstein does this, he can finally be happy and Victor will never need to worry about him ever again. And then if Victor doesn't, the creature said that it would kill all of his remaining friends and family. Victor, of course, reluctantly agrees, because what else is he gonna do? So then this is the point where Victor becomes our narrator again. So Frankenstein actually does start building a wife for the monster, but quickly starts to spiral at the possibility of them having kids, possibly them becoming evil together, the wife rejecting the monster, and then the wife also becoming evil, or the monster, like just all the different possibilities of what could happen, because he doesn't know what's going to happen once he animates this lady corpse, basically. So then he decides, fuck it all, I'm not going to make this creature a creature girl thing, and he destroys it. The original dude creature sees this because he's been stalking him to make sure that he goes through with this promise. He sees this, bursts through the lab, and then tells Victor that he will be there on his wedding night. Frankenstein's a little confused, kind of like, what the fuck's that supposed to mean? But he's pretty sure that means that, like, the creature's gonna kill him. Possibly, pretty much, definitely on his wedding night. So then Frankenstein like abandons his lab and sails out to sea to like get rid of all the evidence, and he falls asleep on his like little dinghy and somehow ends up in Ireland. Don't think about it too much, it happens all the time. I literally had a friend in college who was from Turkey and he hit his head and ended up in Greece, so I guess it does happen. Anyway, he wakes up and he returns to the nearest shore, and he is immediately accused of murder because the people saw a mysterious creature on a boat in like a similar fashion, and they were like, oh, this is that creature that we've never seen before. Thanks to some convenient eyewitness testimony that saw Frankenstein in a different city at the time of the murder, he is proven innocent. And he does actually get the opportunity to look upon the murder victim, and it actually happens to be his bestie Henry. Yeah, he died, he was murdered. R.I.P. to a real one, man. The creature did strangle him. So, you know, Victor understandably has a mental breakdown because, again, this is a direct consequence of his actions, and so he goes home. While at home, he marries Elizabeth. So on their wedding night, Frankenstein prepares to fight the creature because, remember, the creature said, I'm gonna be with you on your wedding night. He tells Elizabeth to go to their room, and what do you think happens? Obviously, she's attacked and killed by the monster because, like, duh, of course, like, Victor, you were keep her in your sight at all time. I don't know, I guess Victor assumed that the monster would attack him, but like, he's killed like his friends and like half of his family so far, so like, don't you think he would kill his wife first? I don't know. It doesn't matter, he's not real. Anyway, Victor's dad ends up dying a few days later too because he's old and he's sad about Elizabeth. Alone and full of vengeance, Victor decides to pursue the monster at last. And then this brings us back to where our novel began with Captain Robert Walton. Captain Walton is captaining the story again. That was dumb. So essentially, like, the boat trip is not going well. People are dying. There's like potentially going to be like some mutiny. Like, it's just not going well. Frankenstein gives like a little speech. It's not enough to like have them continue the journey to the North Pole, but it was like enough to like not have them commit mutiny. So they decided to turn the boat around and head back. Basically then like Victor ends up dying and Walton returns to Victor's room and finds the creature weeping over Victor's body, and Walton's like surprised to like see the monster, but also like see the monster having feelings. And the monster tells Walton that now that his creator has died, his suffering can now end, and not in a way where it's like, I'm at peace. He actually decides that he's gonna kill himself. But he doesn't kill himself right there. He's basically like, I'm gonna go the furthest up north to the ice and cease existing. And that's the end. So I kind of want to talk about the structure of the novel. I kind of talked about how it's like a story within a story within a story. Wikipedia says that this is a frame story written in, I should have Googled how to say this before I wrote it down, epistolary form. So a frame story can be used for several reasons. And a frame story is basically where like there's a greater narrative and then a smaller narrative or several smaller narratives that support the greater narrative. They do it a lot in Shakespeare. For example, Taming of the Shrew has a frame story because the first scene is like players putting on a play and they're cast as characters in Shrew, basically. Most of the time it's used to kind of tell the audience the messages and themes of the story, and it's also a way or an opportunity to emphasize unreliable or biased narrators. And epistolary form refers to a novel that's written in a series of letters, documents, diary entries, or other forms of written communication between characters. So this specific form can add greater realism or sense of realism to the text, as it can make the story feel more believable as the speaker is sort of speaking directly from their perspective rather than having this omniscient third-person narrator. Or if they're using newspaper entries to sort of tell the story, it can feel more like a source rather than a story, if that makes sense. And so it feels a little bit more authentic, even if it is fiction. The frame story structure with the epistolary form really emphasizes our various speakers' biases and prejudices towards others throughout the story. And I think that's why Mary Shelley chose to write the story like this. For example, we are introduced to Frankenstein before we are introduced to his monster. So we, as the readers, get really comfortable with Frankenstein and Frankenstein's perspective and his motives. So we end up sympathizing with him. When he fears his creation, we as the readers do too, because we don't know anything different. All Frankenstein has told us is that he made this really scary monster, and now this monster is suddenly loose. Frankenstein is theorizing that this monster has killed people, so what else are we the readers supposed to believe when this is what our narrator at the time is telling us? Then when we do get to meet the creature and the creature sort of takes over as our narrator, we, like Frankenstein, are fearful for what he is about to say or describe because we don't know anything different. But when we get to hear his journey of fear and isolation and learning and this deep sadness, we sympathize with the creature suddenly. And then when it is revealed that the monster did kill Victor's brother William, we kind of understand why, because Victor in a way wronged the monster and we feel bad for the monster. I think Shelley did this on purpose, as the novel focuses on themes of prejudice and isolation and the destructive nature of revenge in various ways. And then if you weren't aware, or maybe you just forgot, the full title for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is actually Frankenstein, or, the modern Prometheus. And I wanted to discuss the significance of the title, and specifically that often left behind second portion, if that wasn't clear. As we've discussed, Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is the scientist. The monster doesn't have a name. That's on purpose. Frankenstein never gives the creature a name. It's a way to dehumanize him. He doesn't see the creature as human, he sees the creature as a creature. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory, but I feel like I need to point it out regardless. Prometheus, however, is a figure from Greek mythology. He is usually classified as a titan. Some people say that he's just a son of a titan. He's also sort of classified as a god, but in most depictions he is a titan that ended up siding with the gods of Olympus. So in general, Greek mythology, he's known specifically as the god of forethought, fire, and according to Wikipedia, crafty counsel. I don't know what the fuck that means, but you know, like, that's what it says. Prometheus is also sometimes credited for crafting humanity out of clay, but like all creation myths and legends, this changes depending on the source. Sometimes, however, this crafting of clay is also specifically credited to Hephaestus, so take that specific detail as you will. So for my research, this is the simplest I could make the story of Prometheus. After the war between the Titans and the gods, Prometheus and his twin brother Epimetheus became close to the gods of Olympus. Zeus asked the twins to create creatures to populate and roam the earth, giving them skills and ideals that would honor the gods of Olympus. Epimetheus made essentially animals. He made birds that could fly, he made fish that could swim, all things that the gods could do, but they didn't look like gods because they were animals. Prometheus decided to make something else though. He took the clay of the earth and began to mold the body of a human, making them in the very image of the gods. Athena liked Prometheus's idea so much, she breathed literal life into the clay. Now Athena and Prometheus were besties, as Athena would tell Prometheus all these like knowledgeable things. And with that breath of life, humans were created. However, as we know, Epimetheus gave the animals the skill of the gods, like flying and swimming and climbing. There was no more gifts left to bestow on the humans because they had all been given to these animals. Zeus was like okay with that though, because they already looked like gods. They didn't need to look like gods and have the power of the gods. Zeus thought that this sort of lack of powers would keep the people humble, and then they would have no choice but to worship the all-powerful gods. So then Zeus asked Prometheus to teach his creation, the humans, how to offer sacrifices to the gods properly. So Prometheus thought, of course, this would be the perfect opportunity to pull one over on Zeus. Brilliant idea, Prometheus. That always works out. Essentially, Prometheus and the humans created 2 piles of meat to offer to Zeus and the other gods. They made one pile look really good, but it had like all the really bad fat and gristle, but it just looked really good. And then the other pile looked horrible, but they kind of like hid the really good slices of meat underneath. So Zeus obviously took the pile that looked better. He got pissed because he realized he was duped when he unwrapped it back home at Mount Olympus. So as punishment, he revoked the use of fire for the humans. So Prometheus was pissed. He liked the humans. He created them. He didn't want them to suffer and die because they couldn't cook food anymore. So what does Prometheus do? He goes to Mount Olympus's resident ugly Hephaestus and steals a spark from his forge to bring it back to the humans. So when Prometheus brings this spark of fire from Hephaestus's forge to the humans, civilization flourishes, and Zeus was pissed. So as punishment, Zeus had Hephaestus chain Prometheus to a giant cliff. And a giant bird, most of the time it's an eagle, sometimes it's a vulture, depends on what you read, but this bird would come down and peck out his liver, and then at night his liver would grow back, and then in the morning the bird would come back and eat his liver again. It was a never-ending cycle, and this was sort of a punishment, not sort of, this was Zeus's punishment to Prometheus. Why would Mary Shelley subtitle her book Frankenstein with, quote, or the modern Prometheus? Well, most simply put, like Prometheus, Frankenstein creates life, and in doing so unleashes a sort of uncontrollable power that will lead to his own punishment. In the myth of Prometheus, Zeus punishes him for stealing fire, but he is really punished for what the fire allows the humans to do. With fire, they can live, and they can build civilizations, and they can essentially have power that makes them feel like gods, which was blasphemy in the eyes of Zeus. Frankenstein is not punished in the end due to his act of creation, but the results of his creation and the implications it may have. Once the monster gains sentience and language and empathy, He then begins to kill. Frankenstein can no longer control his creation due to its growth and knowledge, much like the humans within the story of Prometheus, which leads to Frankenstein's cyclical punishment of endless guilt and grief, coupled with the death of everyone he loves. Throughout the novel, Shelley's characters also reference Paradise Lost by John Milton, and this poem tells the biblical story of Adam and Eve. And Frankenstein's monster even reads this poem, and its themes and ideals actually become an integral part of its internal struggle. Now, listen to what the monster says to Frankenstein. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. A page later, the monster continues. God, in pity, made man beautiful and alluring, after his own image, but my form is filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. The monster is drawing similarities between itself and man, Adam, and then God and Frankenstein, solidifying them as direct representations of a modern and Christian version of Prometheus. Shelley's use of Christian imagery and themes, specifically in regards to what it's commonly called the fall of man, not only likens Frankenstein's ambition to create life to Eve's temptation, which is the original sin, but it also implies that the power of bestowing life and its gifts belong to the Judeo god. I mean this in the sense that although Shelley is not confirmed to have believed this, her characters do. They see that the creation of life is not a power likened to that of multiple gods or titans, but to a singular, all-powerful Christian god. This creative choice makes Frankenstein's ambition more damning. After his creation asks for a companion, literally wanting an Eve to his Adam after reading Paradise Lost, Frankenstein truly sees that his Hamartia is placing himself in the role of God, capital G, God. Frankenstein is the modern Prometheus through the act of creating life by playing God. It is modern not only because he does so through modern means, science, but because he sees his power as equivalent to that of a Christian God, and Christianity is a modern invention, at least in comparison to the Greek Pantheon. So this isn't an English class, and we're not going to go through every single symbol, motif, or theme of the novel, but I kind of just wanted to talk about what I think is the overall overarching theme / message of the novel. And personally, I think overall the book is a commentary on the danger of having too much uncontrolled, unchecked ambition. A question I asked myself throughout the novel is why we had this third narrator, Captain Robert Walton, there. I just didn't know why we needed him at first. I was confused why I was reading these letters. I was thinking, why couldn't we just have the creature and Frankenstein go back and forth and we would get the same message? But that's not the case. Frankenstein sees himself in Walton, as Walton is also on a dangerous quest driven by the pursuit of glory through finding knowledge. And this is where Shelley's choice of a frame story through the epistolary form shines. In telling his, and in turn the creature's story to Walton, Shelley seems to be talking directly to the audience. For example, on page 40, Victor tells Walton the following: I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. Without Walton, sure, we could have the theme of ambition, but I do not think it would be at the forefront of the novel's narrative. The narrative would shift to be the dynamic between Frankenstein and his monster without this third party. It would become more so about the isolation, vengeance, and prejudice. And again, these themes are still definitely present in the book, but they are all as a result of Frankenstein's unchecked ambition. Ambition is the driving force behind the inciting incident of the main portion of the novel, and thus the overall story of the novel. So not just the plot, but the story as well. The other themes, additionally, Shelley choosing to subtitle the novel with "For the Modern Prometheus," also highlights how dangerous ambition can be if unchecked. We already talked about Prometheus sort of in length, so I won't go too much more into it, but I'm just bringing it up as it's relevant to what we're talking about right now. Unlike Prometheus, who gave humans fire out of compassion for their kind, Frankenstein gives the creature life solely because he wants to know that he can. It's also important to point out, though, part of the reason why Zeus gets so upset with Prometheus is because humans start to conquer and enslave one another thanks to firepower, which can relate to the potential of humanity's unchecked ambition. So the modern Prometheus is an extension of this aspect of the myth of Prometheus, as much as it is a reference to Frankenstein literally giving life to the creature. A random essay I found online summed it up like this, quote, "The difference between their punishments is that Frankenstein was psychologically bound to alienation, while Prometheus was bound by the gods. This is also an indicator from Shelley, being that, in ancient times, it was the gods who controlled everything, and were the ones who held responsibility for all that happened. But on modern terms, man is in control, even for his own damnation." And you know, what is more modern than mental illness, self-induced guilt, and lack of self-control? Those are my thoughts on Frankenstein. Thank you so much for being here. Let me know if you want me to cover more literary pieces, novels, if you will. I obviously love to read. I want to do a video on Tomie. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. I have specific literary questions before send off. Answer these in the comments below. In the myth and legend of Prometheus, at the end, his punishment is that his liver gets pecked out. What do you think is Frankenstein's liver? And then, do you think the ending of the novel is satisfying? I want to know. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video.